Is the Heartland Flyer coming to an end?
Effective August 31st, Lone Star funds will run out.
It's time to be concerned. It's time to stop pretending and accept some uncomfortable political realities. And it's time to take action. With so much good Amtrak news the last few years, it can be easy to forget that the future of passenger rail is not a given. Recently, we got a painful reminder of that. Today, we are riding the Amtrak Heartland Flyer, the once daily train between Fort Worth, Texas, and Oklahoma City. Despite its flaws, ridership on this route is growing. Nevertheless, politicians in both states have tried to kill it. Last year, they almost succeeded, but then rescue funding came from a surprising source. This year, though, it looks like it might actually be lights out for the Heartland Flyer. Our journey begins at Fort Worth, Texas. Often overshadowed in conversations by its larger neighbor, Dallas, Fort Worth is home to about 1 million people. I enjoyed my brief time around downtown, probably partially because there was a cool art festival happening when I was there. Fort Worth's main downtown transportation hub is Central Station. It's a convenient place where all modes come together. You can hop on a bike share or take the bus. And right next to the bus station are the platforms for the TRE commuter rail to Dallas and the Tex Rail train to DFW Airport. Reviews of both of those coming soon. Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new Trains Are Awesome video. I'm Tom. I'm at Fort Worth Central Station in Fort Worth, Texas. It's time for another Amtrak trip, and this might be one that I only get one chance to do. We're taking the Heartland Flyer from here to Oklahoma City. The Amtrak platforms are behind the commuter rail platforms, meaning you have to cross the tracks. Every afternoon, the Texas Eagle service between Chicago and San Antonio stops here in both directions. And then around 5 in the afternoon, this is where you board the Heartland Flyer. Our train is already waiting for us. It is made up of 2 General Electric P42 DC locomotives, one on each end, with 3 Superliner cars sandwiched in between. One of these cars has the brand new Phase 7 paint scheme. The conductor checks your ticket before you board and then instructs you on what car to go to, based on your destination. Today, passengers going to Oklahoma City were sent to the middle car. Folks going to stops in between had to sit in the front car. The third car was closed off. Our seats are on the upper level. Lower level seats are usually reserved for people who cannot climb the stairs. This train does not have business class. Once I'm in the right coach, I can pick whichever seat I want. I've reviewed Superliners before, but let's take a quick look at our seat. Superliner seats are incredibly comfortable thanks to their generous padding, great recline, and unbelievable legroom. I mean, these are the same cars that are used on overnight trips. They also come equipped with tray tables, power outlets, leg rests and foot rests, and reading lights. Baggage can be stored overhead in the large racks. All passengers must have been on board already because a few minutes before our scheduled departure time of 5:25, the train lurches into motion. But we go backwards? I was a little bit confused about this, but then a few minutes later, we pull forward, and suddenly it all makes sense. See, the tracks that the Heartland Flyer takes branch off from the other tracks about halfway through the platform. So we had to back up until we were past the switch and then wait for the switch to change so we could begin our journey to Oklahoma City. The trip from Cowtown to OKC is scheduled to take exactly 4 hours, and we will make 5 intermediate stops. Our first stop is Gainesville, Texas. After that, we will cross the border into Oklahoma, calling at Ardmore, Pauls Valley, Purcell, and Norman. The entire route is on tracks owned by freight company BNSF, which is actually headquartered here in Fort Worth.
Well, I'd said 4:30. 4:30. 4:30. I didn't know. That's what I
Over there, we see a train of the Grapevine Vintage Railroad. Earlier, the same day that I filmed this video, I rode that train, so make sure to subscribe to Trains Are Awesome so you don't miss that video when it comes out. Soon we pass by the Fort Worth stockyards, after which we begin to make our way through the suburbs. Weirdly, at this point, we've strayed away from the route that the map says we are supposed to be on. It was actually pretty funny to see our train symbol floating off the track on the intercity rail map. I don't know if this is a detour or if the maps are just wrong, so if anybody knows, please let me know in the comments below.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? This time I'd like to welcome everyone aboard this Amtrak train 822, the Heartland Flyer. We are bound for Oklahoma City. We'll be making stops in between at Gainesville, Ardmore, Falls Valley, Purcell, Norman. Again, our final stop tonight is Oklahoma City. Again, welcome aboard. Thank you for choosing Amtrak. Just a few things about the train as we get started.
It's a little early for dinner for me, but I am kind of hungry, so let's just go downstairs to the cafe. I looked up the Heartland Flyer menu beforehand to see if they had anything unique to this route, but really nothing stood out. It's just their regular menu. I got a cheeseburger and a soda, and while my burger was heating up, I struck up a conversation with the crew, who were all sitting down there. It turns out that they are all based in Fort Worth, and they spend the night in Oklahoma City to then take the train back to Fort Worth the next morning. They were really nice, and they gave me this squishy Heartland Flyer football as a souvenir for my trip. It may be your only chance to get one, they said. That, kids, is called foreshadowing. Besides the cafe, downstairs you will also find additional luggage storage and several restrooms. I found at least the one that I used was clean and everything was working. All day I've been exploring Dallas and Fort Worth. It's been rainy and windy and cold. My shoes are completely drenched, but now I'm on the train and the sun is coming out. Hopefully that's a good sign for the Heartland Flyer. Before we talk about the somber future of the Heartland Flyer, we have to talk about how this train got here. These tracks were built in the 1880s by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, who used the line to transport cattle. However, very soon there would be multiple settlements built along the line. Much of what today is Oklahoma was designated Indian Territory, land assigned to the indigenous peoples who had forcibly been removed from their land in the east. However, in the middle of this territory, there was some unassigned land, with the railroad running right down the middle of it. The government in 1889 allowed people to build their homesteads in this unassigned land, and so towns popped up along the railroad, most notably Oklahoma City. The Santa Fe ran their Texas Chief train along this line, which ran from Chicago down to Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Fort Worth, Houston, and Galveston. Amtrak took over the Texas Chief upon their creation in 1971, then they renamed it to the Lone Star in 74 and discontinued it in 79. Anyway, in the 1990s, politicians began talking about rebooting train service on the corridor between Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, and Kansas City. From what I've read, it seems like the whole process went quite fast. Official talks began in 1998, and the service launched on June 14, 1999. However, because of a limited budget, they only ran between Fort Worth and Oklahoma City, saving the extension north into Kansas for later. The name Heartland Flyer was picked in a naming contest. The winner was Katie Moore, who was 11 years old at the time. For the first few years, the train relied on federal funding. However, after that expired, officials in Oklahoma and Texas responded to public pressure to keep the train running and committed to funding the train. Since 2008, Amtrak routes that are under 750 miles long are not eligible for federal funding, and they must be funded by the states that they run through. That is why you have Amtrak Michigan services, Illinois services, California services, etc. For the Heartland Flyer, funding is jointly provided by the Oklahoma Department of Transportation and the Texas Department of Transportation. As far as transportation costs go, it's relatively cheap. Texas is on the hook for $3.5 million, Oklahoma for $2.5 million, and the remainder is made up by ticket sales. Right now we're pulling into Gainesville, Texas, a small town of about 17,000 people, 10% of whom work at one of the largest airplane seat manufacturers in the world. Wikipedia says there are at least 10 Gainesvilles in the United States, and we're only about 10 miles from the Oklahoma border here. Every year on the Heartland Flyer, the most popular service is the Big Game Train, which runs every year in October when the Red River Rivalry football game is played between the University of Oklahoma and the University of Texas. For the Big Game Train, they add an extra car, a sightseer lounge, and they run the train all the way to Dallas. But even on normal days, the Heartland Flyer sees decent ridership too. In 2025, it carried over 80,000 passengers, a record. It's just barely higher than what they did in 2024, but significantly higher than their pre-pandemic numbers. Clearly, the demand exists, and that's even with their less than ideal schedule. I'll explain, but first I'd like to point out that we are now crossing the Red River, which forms the border between Texas and Oklahoma. Not far away from here is one of the largest casinos in the world, coincidentally located right near the border of a very populous state where gambling is prohibited. The Heartland Flyer, in my opinion, is held back by two major issues. The first is the fact that it does not go north of Oklahoma City, meaning that there's only one connection to the rest of the Amtrak network at Fort Worth. Did you know that 30% of the Heartland Flyer's passengers transfer to the Texas Eagle? There is connecting bus service that takes you north from Oklahoma City to Newton, Kansas, where you can then get on the Southwest Chief. However, advocates have been asking for the train to extend north ever since the train's inception. As recently as 2023, state officials from Oklahoma and Kansas have requested federal funding to study this extension, and one of the cities along the way has even invested in improving their train station. The second major issue is that the train only runs once a day. That's great for day trippers from OKC to Fort Worth who want to spend the day in Texas. But the other way around, it means that you have to get a place to stay in Oklahoma City, since it arrives at 9:30 at night. If you want to see any of the city during daylight, you'll have to book 2 nights because the departure back to Fort Worth is early in the morning. Essentially, it's the same problem as the Pierre Marquette between Grand Rapids, Michigan and Chicago. When I lived in Michigan, it was a convenient way to spend the day in the Windy City. But when I moved to Chicago and I suddenly wanted to visit friends and family back in Grand Rapids, it meant getting into GR at midnight. In both cases, having a second round trip would make the train a lot easier to take for people from the larger city on the route. Like, yes, running a second frequency would mean you need more crews and more equipment, meaning that the subsidy would be higher, but I also think that you would get more riders since the Dallas-Fort Worth area is the bigger of the two metropolitan areas, so you've got more riders that would consider taking the train, if it means they get into Oklahoma City at a reasonable time. But instead of worrying about adding a second frequency, we need to worry about keeping the single frequency that we have, and I'll explain more once we leave our first stop in Oklahoma, Ardmore. Ardmore is home to almost 25,000 people. One way to describe the people here would be resilient, as the town has survived quite a few tragedies. A train car filled with gas exploded in 1915, wiping out most of downtown and costing the lives of 43 people, and there was an airplane crash here in 1966, claiming 83 lives. Interestingly, Ardmore had a streetcar. It never reached more than 5 miles long. It was opened in 1906 and dismantled already in 1922. Now, a century later, Ardmore's other rail connection, the Heartland Flyer, might be facing the same fate. So here's what's going on. For a few years now, politicians, particularly in Texas, have been trying to defund the train. Perhaps you remember last year, the Heartland Flyer was in the news for a little bit because it was being threatened with extinction. That was resolved, but this time it might not be so lucky. Remember how I said the route has to be funded by the states? Well, the money is given to Amtrak by the Texas and Oklahoma Departments of Transportation. However, those departments don't get to decide how much money they spend, the state legislatures do. In both Texas and Oklahoma, the state Senate and the state House of Representatives are dominated by Republicans. It's actually even more skewed in Oklahoma than in Texas. What's more, these legislatures don't meet year-round. I remember when I first moved to the US, I was super surprised that in most states, the legislature only meets for a few months at a time and then just completely shuts down. The Oklahoma legislature meets every year, for a few months in the spring. The Texas legislature meets only once every 2 years, also in the spring, only on odd-numbered years. So last year, the last time that they met, Texas representatives did not give the Texas Department of Transportation any money to support the Heartland Flyer. The legislature then closed, and that was that. To fund the train, an organization known as the North Central Texas Council of Governments stepped in, and they put up the remaining money, which has allowed the Heartland Flyer to keep running all this time. But this year, lawmakers in Oklahoma have decided that since Texas isn't funding it, they're not going to either. To quote Republican Trey Caldwell, I don't think it should be on the state of Oklahoma to subsidize it and keep it alive. If I was a cynical person and trying to be counterproductive, I'd say something like, this translates to, I don't think we should do what we were elected to do and fund something that gives thousands of our citizens the ability to travel. Good thing I'm not a cynical person, right? There are conflicting news reports on when the train will actually end. Most outlets are saying end of August, although others are saying that Oklahoma will fund it until the end of December. The Oklahoma legislative session runs until May 29th, so there is still time. If you do live in Oklahoma, be sure to contact your representatives. Let them know you want to keep the train. Let them know you don't want 80,000 extra cars on I-35. Call every day, be annoying, but not too annoying, of course. We gotta make sure they don't think it's just rail fans that care. No, but seriously, what's so frustrating about this is that there's absolutely no need for it. The train is not underperforming, rather the opposite. It's transporting more riders than ever before. And it's not expensive either. I know that I'm talking about other people's money, although as a federal taxpayer, whenever we talk about any of these states that don't have a state income tax, it does kind of feel like I'm talking about my money too. But let me put it into perspective. Oklahoma's state budget is about $13 billion. Texas's budget is $338 billion for 2 years, so $169 billion for 1 year. The $3.5 million that the Heartland Flyer costs Texas is 0.00002% of the state budget. To put that into perspective, if the budget was $1,000, the Heartland Flyer would be 2 pennies. Okay, but states have to pay for a lot of things. Fine, let's narrow it down to the transportation budget then. Oklahoma, $2.5 billion. Texas, almost $20 billion. No matter which way you look at it, we're talking about a fraction of a fraction. Tiny amounts. A generous perspective would be to assume that the lawmakers who cut the funding were just ignorant. Again, a cynic would say that it's being done out of spite. Increasingly, it seems that public transportation is being sucked into the culture war, as everything inevitably will be. And I do want to spend some time on this. A few weeks ago, I made a video about the new South Shoreline branch in Indiana. I made a remark celebrating the bipartisan support for this new rail project, something I noted wasn't always a given. I got a few comments saying, stop framing public transportation as a progressive issue. Conservatives love transit too. That may seem like one statement, but I think really there are 2 statements baked into that. The first is that public transportation shouldn't be a partisan issue, and I fully agree with that. The second statement is that public transportation isn't a partisan issue, and for me to believe that, you'd have to convince me to ignore what I see with my own eyes. Are there Republicans who support trains? Absolutely. I know some personally. It's a fact that many Republicans in Congress who represent districts with Amtrak stations are big supporters of Amtrak. I mentioned Indiana. Modernizing the South Shoreline is a bipartisan effort. And I mean, personally, I have listened to multiple speeches by Sean Duffy where he argues that his boss deserves all the credit for Amtrak's recent accomplishments. But we can't ignore the other side of the coin. We can't ignore the Republican governors that vetoed intercity rail projects in Florida and Wisconsin, state legislators in Pennsylvania that forced SEPTA to make devastating cuts, or those in Indiana who banned light rail. The current administration hasn't awarded any grants for new public transportation projects in almost a year and a half. Compare that to the previous administration and Congress who passed a record amount of infrastructure spending. And I can already hear the rebuttal. But what about Democrats? Well, despite being somewhat regularly labeled a Democrat propagandist, I'm not a very good one. Just familiarize yourself with my content, criticizing Democrats in Illinois for holding Chicago's transit hostage, calling out the mayor of Atlanta for some comments that just weren't very smart, my criticisms of the council and the mayor in DC for systematically dismantling the public transportation in the city where I live. I'm under no illusion that Democrats are the heroes of public transportation. I fully acknowledge that too many of them are comfortable with the status quo. But I don't see any evidence to support the claim that Republicans and Democrats are the same when it comes to protecting and expanding public transportation. And I think this example of the Heartland Flyer illustrates it, because like we said, there's no real genuine reason to shut the train down. It doesn't make any sort of financial impact to the budget, but it does make a big impact in the lives of a diverse group of travelers. They're not all one political ideology. The Republicans shutting this train down are hurting their own constituents. If you are still watching this, then chances are, just like me, you appreciate freedom, and you appreciate the freedom that comes with having a choice in how to move around. And no matter what side we're on, if we can't acknowledge that there are too many people on our side, don't recognize this, then we are depriving ourselves of this freedom. If you are conservative in Oklahoma who supports this, you have a great opportunity in the next few days to make a huge difference by talking to your representatives and other like-minded people about the importance of this train. And no matter what your political leanings are or where you live, if you're in the United States, there's another opportunity for bipartisanship coming. In September, Congress has to reauthorize the surface transportation spending. This is the one chance every 5 years to make your voice heard about how infrastructure should be funded in this country. And specifically this time around, there could be a devastating impact, especially on commuter rail.
Oklahoma City. This is my second time coming here. I think first time was like 10 years ago.
So we've arrived at the beautiful Oklahoma City Santa Fe Depot, which was built in 1934 as the railroad tracks through the city were being elevated. Transportation policy affects us all, and it's not something we can afford to let slip into the ugly jaws of partisan bickering. Even if you drive, if your neighbor has a choice in how to move, that could mean an emptier road for you. So for the next few months, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to your representatives. So if you want to learn more on how to come together to save our trains and make them better, subscribe to Trains Are Awesome. Here at the Santa Fe Depot, passengers can transfer to the thruway bus taking them to Kansas, but this is my destination for the night.
Oh, that was a really nice ride. Some great scenery by the river and also just the rolling green hills. Super friendly staff, a lot of families on board because it was a Saturday, and yeah, it would be an absolute shame if we lost this connection. I'm glad that I took it, and I would take it again.
If that is still possible, of course. Anyway, thank you so much for watching today, and if there are any developments in the story, of course I will let you know. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Trains Are Awesome. Sorry for the ranting, it was necessary. We'll see you next time.